Hello, Internet. I'm Adam Kujawa, Director of Malwarebytes Labs, and welcome to our first ever Malwarebytes Labs Live. What we're going to be doing here is talking about various threats and things to be concerned about the threat landscape, and interviewing some people that are within the company and who know a hell of a lot more than I do. So let's go ahead and get started by introducing our main speaker today, Thomas Reed, our Director of Mac and Mobile. Thomas, how you doing?
Good. How are you, Adam?
I'm doing great, thanks.
Good.
So, do you want to start off by giving a little background on yourself and your experience and how you like to fight malware?
Sure. So I am mostly self-taught in the security area, and I got my start with the Safe Mac. A lot of people may have heard of that in the past. I posted a lot of security-related blog articles, adware removal instructions, and that sort of thing. And from there, sort of branched out into writing Adware Medic, which was an adware removal tool. And Malwarebytes bought that and hired me on to continue the development. And here I am today.
And we're really, really glad to have you. The Safe Mac was a really fantastic blog. And you write for us now on Malwarebytes Labs pretty often too, don't you?
I do, yeah.
Yeah. So let's go ahead and get started. We're going to ask some questions and also kind of cover some areas about Mac malware. Starting off with, there's a myth going around that Macs don't get malware. What do you say to that?
Yeah, that's false, definitely. So what a lot of people will say is Macs don't get viruses. And even a lot of very knowledgeable people will say that. Unfortunately, it's actually, in spirit, it is false. There is a grain of truth in there that some experts like to use to make it sound like they're more secure than they are. So in truth, Macs actually don't get viruses if you're talking about a specific kind of malware. So a virus is a specific kind of malware that has particular characteristics. It can self-infect. It can spread by itself. It infects other processes. So by that definition, no, Macs don't get viruses. However, there's plenty of other kinds of malware out there that can infect Macs. There are Trojans, there's spyware, there are keyloggers, all kinds of things. There's adware. There are what we call pups, or potentially unwanted programs. And those are, adware and pups especially, are really going through the roof on the Mac these days.
Yeah, so on the Windows side, one of the big things we see cyber criminals doing and trying to infect systems with malware is basically using social engineering. That might be in the form of malicious spam or a hijacked social media account or something like that. Do you see kind of the same things going on the Mac side?
Definitely. The vast majority of Mac malware comes in through some kind of a social exploit. It could be something like a fake Flash player. It could be some, maybe like a cracked version of Adobe Photoshop, something like that. Something that the user downloads and they install it and they're infected with adware. And then in other cases, in the case of pups, they can just pretend to be something desirable, and the user downloads them, and they think they're getting their money's worth when they buy it, but it's really not doing what they think it's doing.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
So what would you say as far as how the last few years, the increase in Mac malware, what would you say has that been pretty massive, pretty quick, or what we expected?
Yeah, we've seen a significant increase in the malware specifically on the Mac. So if we're looking at comparing to last year we saw 7 new pieces of malware for the Mac. This year, and we're talking about at this point in the year, so we still have a couple of months left here. We've seen 17 pieces of new Mac malware. So that's a pretty big increase. That's about a 240% increase, and it's a 155% increase over the previous high point. There was a spike in 2012 when there were a whole bunch of pieces of malware that were infecting Mac computers through Java exploits, Java vulnerabilities. And that was the previous high point in Mac malware, and we've surpassed that by now.
Now, those numbers may not seem huge to everybody when you think about on the Windows side, we deal with thousands of new malware every quarter, but it all started somewhere. I mean, in the very beginning, the early days of Windows and PC malware, there wasn't a lot of different families out there, but more people, the ones made two, 3, 4, 5, 6, and they just kept growing and growing. And based on that chart that we just showed, it kind of looks the same way on the Mac side. But what do you think in maybe 10 years from now, where we might actually see like how much Mac malware is out there?
Yeah, I think in 10 years, we'll definitely see a lot more Mac malware than we do today. There's really nothing particularly challenging about infecting a Mac. It's really easy to do. You don't even have to get any particular elevated permissions in order to do it. You can get elevated permissions, and that lets you do some additional things, but it's not necessary. So I suspect we will continue to see a lot more stuff like this. And I think that we'll also see significant growth in pups. Those are, again, potentially unwanted programs. Those are things like, cleaning apps that tell you, oh my gosh, your system is so full of junk. And they'll say that even on a brand new, fresh, out of the box Mac. So,
wow.
Stuff like that uses scare tactics to try to get you to buy something you don't need. Those are really, really exploding right now.
Yeah. I mean, we see the same thing on the Windows side as well. Scammers really are making a run of it and trying to get as many people with as many different devices as possible to fall for their tactics. So we just talked about kind of where we see this going, and we talked about the current landscape a little bit, but I'm curious about the past. Honestly, I always like to look back to how malware used to be to kind of get an idea of what we might deal with in the future. An example of this would be that a lot of people don't know the very first ransomware ever created was encrypting ransomware. And then that was back in 1989. And since then, we had ransomware families that didn't encrypt anything, that just locked the screen. And then come 2013, CryptoLocker, it was encrypting files again. So everything seems to go around. Are there any notable examples of families from Mac malware history that you want to point out?
Yeah, actually, there's some very interesting things to point out. So one thing that a lot of people don't actually know is that the first really widespread piece of malware ever was actually in the Apple ecosystem. It was the Elk cloner virus, and it originally affected the Apple II computer. So this was before Windows, before Mac, and it was really, there were pieces of malware before that point, but this was the first one that really got attention. And a lot of people don't realize that. They think of malware as typically being originally a Windows only problem for a long time, and it really wasn't. It started on Apple machines first.
Yeah. What did Elk cloner do?
Yeah, it was a piece of malware that would get onto a disk, and when you put that disk into other computers, it was able to copy itself and infect those other computers. And of course, back then, malware really wasn't financially motivated like it is today. It was just sort of, some kids or hackers trying to play pranks or show off their skills or, something along those lines. So it really wasn't particularly dangerous.
Yeah. Those were the days, right?
Yeah. 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 Back when the worst thing you had to worry about with malware was maybe it would crash your computer.
Yeah. I mean, you still have to worry about that, but that's the bottom of your concerns for sure. So let's talk about how a person could identify or tell if their Mac is infected with malware.
Yeah, so if you think you're infected, there are a few signs that you can look for. Most importantly are some unwanted pop-ups or redirects. So when I say a redirect, I mean you try to go to one website and you end up on a different one. So if you see that sort of thing in your web browser, that may be a sign that you have some kind of malware or adware. It's not a guarantee. There are other reasons that you could see that, but it is a possible cause. You could also see some pop-up ads that appear outside the web browser. And that's pretty much always a guarantee that you have something, either some kind of adware that's installed on your system or some kind of application that's ad supported and that is kind of going a little overboard on displaying ads. Really, ad supported apps should keep the ads within themselves, not expose them throughout the system. You may also see poor system performance. That has been a symptom of some Mac malware or adware in the past. However, it's not, a lot of people say, oh, if my Mac is going slow, I have malware. That's really not a particularly strong indicator of malware. There are many other possible causes that are far more common. And most worryingly, if you have real malware, like the malicious stuff, not this stuff that's just kind of annoying. If you have real malware, you probably don't even know. Real malware does its best to remain hidden behind the scenes so that it can steal whatever data it's looking to steal, whether that be your keystrokes or your credit card information, maybe your keychain files and passwords. Whatever it's looking for, it's going to try and stay quiet and steal that data and send it back home.
Okay. And that actually makes me think of another question. Out of all the stuff that you've seen, all the malware you've seen for Mac over the last, let's say, couple of years, is there any sort of like trend as far as what the capabilities are, what kind of information is trying to be stolen or access is trying to be obtained?
Yeah, I will say that the malware that we've been seeing has been more sophisticated overall than it was, say, 5 years ago. A lot of malware these days will install some kind of a backdoor that gives that malware access to your system. So the hacker who distributed it can do things like run remote commands, shell commands on your computer. They can grab files from your computer. They can upload new stuff to your computer. So some of these backdoors are fairly general. You don't really know what they're looking for unless you kind of catch them in the act of grabbing files. Other malware, such as a particularly recent one that appeared, a new variant of it appeared called Proton. Proton is particularly interested in getting password information. So any kind of file that has passwords in it, your keychain, your 1Password vault, your browser autofill data that may have passwords in it, anything like that. It tries to take all those files and send them up to a server.
Yeah, a few years ago, there was that iCloud breach where a lot of celebrities had, inappropriate, I guess, photos stolen from their iCloud accounts. I think that the way that happened was by a single attacker kind of gaining information about the celebrities enough anyway to guess their passwords or their password questions. So that was mostly social engineering. But can you see the same thing trying to happen, but with malware instead of social engineering?
Yeah, I definitely would see it would be trivial for some kind of malware to try and do the same thing, grab your photos out of, for example, a piece of malware could go into your Photos app without you even knowing about it, just go into that database and pull out all the photos and upload them somewhere. You might notice some bandwidth issues, your network might slow down a little bit. If you're paying for, some people in some parts of the world pay per, gigabyte of data transmitted. So if you see a whole bunch of data being transmitted, that's definitely not a guarantee you've got something malicious, but it would be a sign that you've got a whole bunch of photos going up into somebody else's server.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, for those of you out there that are watching this right now and have to pay per megabyte, thank you for spending it on us. Really appreciate it. So, so let's talk about, let's say I've got all the symptoms you talked about, poor system performance, ads are popping up all over the place, stuff's moving around. I don't know what's going on. I think I'm infected with Mac malware. What would you recommend the next step be?
Yeah, so next step, obviously, one next step I'm going to recommend is going to be download Malwarebytes for Mac. I'm promoting my own software here, but it is free. You can download it for free. You can run a scan for free. You don't have to pay for it just to do that. So, if you're not looking for malware protection, you don't have to pay anything. You can just run a scan. If that doesn't work, any antivirus company who tells you my software is going to detect 100% of the malware out there, they're lying to you. So it happens. Every piece of antivirus software will miss something sooner or later. So if that happens, you can always contact our support folks. You can post on our forums. Apple has their own forums. You can post there for information about how to remove stuff. Really the key is finding the right experts to help you get rid of a problem, because these things are no longer easy to get rid of. Back in the day when I was writing blog posts about how to remove adware, it was pretty easy to do. And then we started seeing some different techniques, and we started seeing some people who, because of some of the new techniques that adware was using, they were trashing their systems. There was one particular piece of adware that if you removed it wrong, your computer would no longer boot up. So it is important to be careful about the removal and make sure that you know what you're removing and that you're following some good directions or have a good expert to help you.
Awesome. Well, speaking of Apple, and since we're talking about this, I've heard that Apple does a pretty good job of keeping malicious applications off of their app store. Though I know in the last quarterly report that we released, we did talk about some malicious apps making their way on there. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yes, we actually have found that in certain areas of the Mac App Store, there are a lot of pups, lots and lots of unwanted programs, outright scams, actually, in most cases. So in particular, if you search for something like antivirus or adware, looking for something to, you think you're infected, you go to the App Store and you're looking for something to fix that. That's becoming a very commonplace thing for people to do. And unfortunately, there are a lot of companies out there that are capitalizing on that. And there are just floods of junk antivirus apps or anti-adware apps that are on the Mac App Store. If you look at that list, if you do that search, most of what you see in there will actually be junk. A lot of it will either not detect anything at all. So, you run it. I've run some of these things on a system that I purposefully infected with, over 100 adware files, and put them all in the right places. So they were effectively installed just as they would be in the wild. And I ran some of these apps and they found nothing. They told me the system was clean. Others, they might find out of 100 adware files, they might find 5. So clearly these things are not doing what they say they're doing, but they're still on the Mac App Store, unfortunately.
Yeah. Yeah. We kind of a few years ago, we dealt a lot with that on the Windows side. We have a whole lot of fake scanners saying, hey, we can clean your system. It's basically one step away, in my opinion, from tech support scammers. But these things would be bundled with additional malicious software or adware or anything like that. So it's kind of funny if you start to think about it and notice the trends. The Mac threat landscape is only just a few years behind the Windows side. So I think a good idea would be, say, look at what we've dealt with on the Windows side over the last few years. Are we likely going to see that on the Mac side? And I think probably based on what we've seen already, right?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So are there any other tips that you may recommend on how to avoid getting infected in the first place?
Yeah. So obviously, first of all, you want to kind of be selective about what you're downloading, even from the Mac App Store. And this is hard to do sometimes. And there have been a few rare cases where a legitimate developer's application has actually been hijacked to deliver malware. So it can be a little tricky, but if you're careful about what you're downloading, you're avoiding piracy sites and that sort of thing, that's a good first step. You also, if you think you're infected, say you're seeing a pop-up from a site like, let's say, xyz.com. I don't know if that's even a real site or not, but just as an example, if you are seeing pop-ups from that site in your browser a lot, don't go Google, how do I remove xyz.com? Because first of all, xyz.com is not malware. It's a website. There might be some adware that's causing that to load, but generally the name of the website loading is not at all related to the adware or malware. Second of all, you're going to see a lot of fake results when you do that kind of a search. So you may find sites that say, oh yeah, here's how you can remove xyz.com. But then what it actually does is it directs you to download some junk software. So for example, we've got a graphic up now. This graphic shows a particular website. We've got the address of the site blacked out. But if you go and search for how to remove ssp.zryydi.com, this is one of the first sites that you would find. And the app that it promotes is one of these junk apps that's available on the Mac App Store. So you want to avoid those kinds of searches, because they do go to a lot of scam websites that are trying to rip you off. Let's see, some other things. You also want to be careful of links in any email message, even from folks that you know. Maybe somebody's email address has been hacked and it's not really them sending you a message, and you click on it and you download something and it's malware or it's junk software. Or maybe somebody spoofed a message from somebody else's email address. So you got to be really, really careful. Even if it's from somebody you know, don't trust the link unless you were expecting to see it there. Another thing is Macs have this feature called Gatekeeper. And what Gatekeeper does is it protects, it prevents you from accessing things that are sort of outside certain scopes, and it works through code signing. So if you look at the image that we've got up now, this is showing the Gatekeeper settings in Mac OS. So this is in System Preferences, in the Security and Privacy pane. And what Gatekeeper does is it allows you to either allow you to run apps that are downloaded from the App Store and identified developers, which means developers who have signed their applications using an Apple-issued certificate. Like Malwarebytes, we are an identified developer according to this definition. The other option is just the App Store. So that will only allow you to open apps that are from the App Store. If you try to download something else like Malwarebytes or Microsoft Word or something like that, then those apps will not be allowed. There are ways that you can bypass it and open on demand, be able to sort of give an exception. But this kind of makes you safer because it does restrict you to only opening certain kinds of apps. It's not a guarantee though, because a lot of malware these days is signed. So, and a lot of it is actually starting to appear in the App Store.
That was the next question I was going to ask. How often have you seen malicious apps that use stolen certificates? I know we see that on the Windows side a lot.
Yeah, almost all malware these days is signed. It's not a guarantee. Some malware has been unsigned, but if it's not signed, Mac users are going to have a hard time opening it. So most malware is signed. It's not, some of them are probably with stolen certificates, but others are probably just buying a certificate. It only costs you $99 to get a developer account with Apple that lets you get certificates. And then you can use that until Apple shuts you down, basically. You know, if you write malware that uses that, Apple can shut you down. They can take away, revoke that certificate, and then your apps don't run anymore. Your apps won't, you download the app and the system will not allow it to open.
Have you found Apple to be pretty responsive when you report or anybody reports a malicious app in the App Store?
On the App Store, they're not as responsive as I would like them to be. Obviously, if it's something that's really, truly outright malicious, then they'll take that pretty quickly. But these pups that are showing up in the App Store, those I really would like to see action a little faster on Apple's part. They just removed some that I reported months ago. So wow. That's a little slow.
Hopefully they do a better job of that. But yeah, I mean, if you do find a malicious app or a suspected malicious app in the App Store, then go ahead and report it to Apple. Is there like a button or something that they can press, or an email they can reach out to?
Yeah, unfortunately, it's hard to report. If you have actually downloaded the app, then you can actually report it to Apple. I believe the address is reportaproblem.apple.com. So if you have an app that you actually downloaded and you found that it's a fake or it's a junk app, then you can go to reportaproblem.apple.com, sign into your Apple ID there, and it will show you all the applications that you've downloaded, and you can report them. You can actually even get refunds for them. So if you see one that is junk, or that if you've bought one that is junk, then you can actually report it and get a refund for it.
Well, that's
so
cool.
That's a good thing. Yeah,
that is very good.
But unfortunately, reporting it doesn't necessarily result in quick removal.
Yeah.
But of course, the more people that report it, the better.
Yeah, exactly. Cool. Well, before we get into answering some questions from our audience, I have one last question. With all this rise in Mac malware and the dangers that users have to deal with, why do you think it's happening? Why are cyber criminals paying more attention to the Mac side of the house?
Oh, well, Macs are becoming and have been becoming for several years now much more common and much more popular. So we're seeing a lot more Macs out there than we used to. Back in 2010, we really didn't see nearly as many Macs out there. Most people had Windows machines. And true, today, the majority of people still do have Windows machines, but the percentage of people that have Macs has grown a lot. And worse, a lot of the people who have Macs are CEOs or other important people in a company. So if you can target those people, there's a high return on that.
Yeah. And there's less security software developed for that platform. There's less concern about it. And, we started this thing off by saying people think that Macs are immune to malware. So what a perfect operating system to target when there's almost no security on it
exactly.
for the user, against the kind of software you're trying to push.
Yeah, exactly. And honestly, there is and has been for a long time, there's been antivirus software, but most people don't use it. And a lot of Mac experts will actually tell people, don't install antivirus software. It'll only ruin your system.
That kind of leads into our first question, actually.
Yeah.
And if you have a question and you want Thomas to answer it or me to try, go ahead and enter it into the chat, and we'll do our best to get that up on here. But yeah, the first question is: if you have an Apple computer, do you even need cleaning or antivirus software?
Cleaning software, no. So a lot of people will download some of these cleaning apps that they're not antivirus software, but they're supposed to clean your Mac up and make it faster. You do not need that kind of thing. Macs do not need cleaning. They take care of themselves just fine. Antivirus software, yeah, it's becoming an increasing need, mostly for all the adware and pups that are out there. Malware is increasingly common. More people are getting infected by it today than ever before, but it's still, relatively rare to actually find malware on a Mac.
All right, cool.
So you want something that can detect adware and pups for the most part.
Awesome. I mean, that's what is mostly out there right now. But I mean, that same software, especially, and once again, not trying to toot our own horn, but especially our software, as new threats come out and we have to evolve and modify our way of protecting users, we will. So by starting the habit of utilizing antivirus or some sort of protection software with your Mac right now, then by the time, the poop really hits the fan, you'll be protected. Hopefully.
Absolutely. Yeah. That's a good point.
So next question, when Apple has new updates, should I update immediately or wait to make sure that all the bugs are figured out?
That's a very good question. So a lot of people historically have gotten in the habit of not installing updates quickly because, sometimes they can be buggy. Sometimes you might have a problem, and especially with a .0 release, that can be an issue. So for example, like, High Sierra, that's a, OS 10.13.0. So with a 0.0 release, yeah, maybe you want to wait a little, but not too long, because this actually is something that is very, very important to do. You have to install these updates in order to stay secure. Especially these days, Apple isn't always doing a great job of keeping their older systems as secure. So as a good example, folks may have heard of the broad pwn hack. If you haven't, that's basically a hack that can happen through Bluetooth, and it can give somebody else control of your computer. They can get in there and install malware. Mac OS 10.12.6 that was a patch that included a fix for broad pwn. No older version of Mac OS actually got that patch. There were some Mac admins that actually went around and tested some older releases. They tested 10.12.5 and 10.11, and no broad pwn patch in those. So this underscores the importance. You really need to install these updates in at least a relatively timely fashion in order to be safe.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I actually heard about this morning, someone that updated to the latest version of their Mac OS and then their Bluetooth mouse stopped working. Don't treat that possibility as, reason enough to never update, because like Thomas just said, that these updates have patches to protect you from threats, as well as, new functionality or updates for your drivers.
Yeah.
So what do you think is the most common way that Macs get infected?
Yeah, so the most common way is through some kind of a Trojan. So for example, the big, most common example is a fake Adobe Flash Player installer. So the way that you would get one of these is you're browsing around, you go to some site, and suddenly you get this thing that says, to view this content, your Adobe Flash Player needs to be updated. And it gives you a link, helpfully, to download and install the update. Unfortunately, what you download there is not actually an Adobe Flash Player update. It's actually junk software wrapped in something with an Adobe logo on it. It probably is not even really going to look like an Adobe installer. It may look really, really janky. Like it's going to have spelling errors. It's going to have weird icons that aren't associated with Flash Player. So, but people install them because they think that that's what they need, and they end up with all this adware and junk software.
Right.
That's probably the most common, but other examples are piracy. Going on to, for example, any kind of a movie streaming or audio streaming site that says that it's giving you free access to commercial content. That's not going to work. If you want to go see, the latest Star Wars movie, don't try and go see it free on some weird website. Go pay for it. Get it in go to the movie theater. Go get it in the iTunes store on, Netflix or Hubbub or, Hubbub, not Hubbub, Hulu.
Hulu, yeah.
Hulu or, any of these other streaming services.
Yeah. Or any movie. We are not sponsored by Star Wars.
Right. That was just it's just one that's popular. It's coming up soon and people are thinking about it. So.
Yeah. So we're taking questions again. If you want to go ahead and type those in the chat. Next question to ask. I know a lot of people are probably asking in their heads right now, well, I've got a Mac and now I know how to protect it, but I also have an iPhone. How should I protect that? So do you have any advice for those folks?
Yeah. Unfortunately, although there is iPhone malware, it's pretty rare. Even though it's out there, it is impossible to create antivirus software for the iPhone because of security restrictions in the system. One app cannot see it cannot see the system. It cannot see other apps. So all that one particular app on an iPhone can see is its own data, and it can make internet connections and see stuff in the cloud. So really there's no way to scan your iPhone. You cannot scan it for malware and figure out that you're infected. So you're probably safe on your iPhone. There's so little malware out there that it's practically non-existent. But if you did get infected, there's really no option except to wipe your phone.
Oh, wow.
Unfortunately.
Yeah. That is unfortunate.
Yeah. Fortunately, most people that are getting infected they're getting infected by nation states. So, for example, journalists in countries that are trying to suppress these, what the messages that these journalists are saying, that sort of thing. People who are being attacked by malicious nation states.
Okay. All right. Next question. Are there software apps that bypass Mac Gatekeeper?
Well, yes. So bypassing Gatekeeper is actually not that hard. All you have to do is have your software signed with an Apple certificate. So that costs you all of $99. And if you're earning more than $99 on your adware or malware or what have you, then that $99 is probably a drop in the bucket.
Yeah.
So that is one way that you can bypass Gatekeeper. There have been exploits as well that let you get past Gatekeeper. I believe that Patrick Wardle actually found one fairly recently. And then this isn't really an exploit, but it's sort of an unknown vulnerability that can get you past. So Gatekeeper depends entirely on a technology called quarantine. So when you download something in Safari or any other properly coded Mac app, it's going to apply a quarantine flag to that file. And what that flag tells the system is when this gets opened, if it's an app, if it's any kind of executable code, warn the user and make sure that you have permission to open it. And through this quarantine system, that's what actually powers Gatekeeper. So Gatekeeper takes it one step further and says, hey, this isn't signed, it's not running. Or, maybe you have it set to only allow apps from the App Store and this isn't from the App Store, so it's not running. Now, here's where that falls down. If you're not using the right APIs, either deliberately or just because you're not a very good developer, then you can actually download stuff without getting that quarantine flag set. So for example, a lot of torrent apps don't set the quarantine flag. And so if you download something from a torrent, which can be a pretty dangerous thing to do in the first place, depending on where you're downloading from, the quarantine flag isn't set. So whatever you downloaded, you double click it and it instantly is open. There's no review of any kind.
Wow. Wow. All right. Well, if you are a developer out there, please make sure to do that. Your users will thank you. I'm sure we've answered this, or at least mentioned it, but can Macs get hit with ransomware?
Yes, they can. And actually that has happened 3 times so far. So we've seen the first one, which appeared, was KeyRanger. That one was really the most dangerous of all of them. And it was distributed through a hacked copy of Handbrake. The one weakness in KeyRanger was that it had a 3-day timer on it. So once you got infected, it wouldn't actually start encrypting your files for another 3 days. It would wait. And unfortunately for the makers of KeyRanger, but fortunately for the rest of us, it was detected very quickly, and it was stepped on by Apple. It was stepped on by the developers of KeyRanger and detected by just about every antivirus vendor out there, including us, before that 3 days was up.
Nice.
So very few people actually got encrypted by KeyRanger. Then there have been 2 others more recently. One's called FindZip, because it actually would use the Unix command find to find files to encrypt, and the Unix command zip to compress and encrypt them. And it really wasn't very effective. It wasn't widespread, and you can actually decrypt the files that it encrypts fairly easily. Then there was another one called Mac Ransom that I have yet to actually encounter anyone who's seen it in the wild.
Wow.
It was for sale on a website, but I haven't encountered it in the wild.
So, that's just talking about software that or malicious software that could run on a Mac. For those of you that might be curious, if you do encounter a website that says your system is locked, or it's, your files are being encrypted, pay us this whatever, just the website or a pop-up or something like that, that's what we call a browser locker. It doesn't necessarily mean it's actually doing anything to the system. In fact, it's probably not. It's just using the fear of ransomware and of encrypting files to make its victims pay up. But you're likely to encounter that on the Mac as well, right?
Absolutely, yeah. Browser lockers like that are very common, and they're often mistaken for real malware. So now there is one other kind of, it's different from the ransomware you see in Windows, but there is a unique kind on the Mac operating system. On all Apple devices, there's this anti-theft technology. Find my iPhone, find my Mac, et cetera. You can actually locate your devices if this is turned on, and you can, if they're lost, you can lock them. You can display a message. So you can say, hey, if this is found, call such and such. You can remotely wipe it, et cetera. So this is a great feature. It's a great anti-theft thing. The problem is, if somebody gets hold of your Apple ID and password somehow, and this could be through, maybe you reuse your passwords and somebody, like a Yahoo breach, you have the same password on your Apple ID and on your Yahoo account, and Yahoo's been breached so many times now with passwords out there. So what they do is they use that password, they log in to your Apple ID in Find My iPhone or Find My Mac on their device, and then they remotely lock all your devices with a ransom message. And if you see that, if your Mac is locked down with a message that says, that it's, with some threatening message saying call some number, or they won't unlock it, what you need to do is immediately shut it down, take it to Apple. Apple can help you unlock it, but you may need proof of purchase.
So save those receipts.
Yeah.
So next question. Can the Apple Time Machine get infected or compromised? And if so, does Malwarebytes for Mac protect the Time Machine?
Yes, Time Machine could potentially get infected with ransomware. So when we're talking about getting infected, if there were some kind of ransomware that attacked the Mac and that was encrypting stuff, it could potentially encrypt your Time Machine backups if they were connected. If you're talking about the Time Machine device itself actually getting infected, or the data on there getting infected with malware so that it can spread back onto your Mac, no, that really doesn't, that's not a possibility. Obviously, Time Machine, if your Mac is infected and Time Machine is backing that up, then it's going to back up those infected files. If you were then to restore your system from that point in time, that one of those infected snapshots, then you're going to be infected again. But once you manage to clean your Mac off, and then Time Machine has done another backup, then you're fine. You can, as long as you don't restore from one of those infected points in time, you're good. So it can't just magically jump back onto your Mac by itself.
Right. All right. Cool. So that's actually a pretty nice way to recover from ransomware. That I think. I mean, we have the same capability on the Windows side with a system restore, but a lot of people may not have those enabled.
Yeah.
So, what do you think are the worst pups out there for Macs right now?
Well, the most notorious, and I know that there are Mac admins out there everywhere who are already saying it into their screens, is MacKeeper. This one is particularly infamous. It's been around for years, and it is the #1 most common pup that most of these fake Flash players and other such junk installers will drop on your machine. And Mac user uses some scare tactics to get you to purchase it. They also are really bordering on tech support scam, because there's a fake chat that appears on one side of their window. It's always Andrew for some reason. He's the hardest working guy in the world. And for some reason, he really sticks to the script. It's always the same every time. He's very reliable. But one of the things that Andrew will tell you is that you need to beware of malware on your Mac, like TapSnake. TapSnake is actually not Mac malware. It's old Android malware, and it's one of the more common pieces of malware that tech support scammers use to try to frighten you into buying their software.
Oh boy.
So yeah, MacKeeper is really getting kind of borderline tech support scam there. Maybe not even borderline.
Yeah, we see that a lot on the Windows side too. Pups, sorry to interrupt, but pups we've seen are becoming more and more aggressive, utilizing more tactics that we've seen traditionally only with malware. So that's definitely happened on the Mac side as well.
Yes, absolutely. So that's one of the more common ones. We also see a lot of advanced Mac cleaner and lots of other programs from that same company, PCVark. They're really prolific right now. They're pumping out new programs all the time. So, we've got our work cut out for us keeping up with that, just always looking for new PCVark programs. I think we're probably up to detecting 15 or so by now. There are a lot of them.
Wow.
And then, there's fake backup programs that are really junk. All kinds of other things. Lots and lots of fake cleaners. Okay.
So, can you tell us a little bit about Malwarebytes for Mac? What does it protect or do? I mean, it protects Macs, but how does it work?
Yeah, so Malwarebytes for Mac, it now actually has real-time protection, so it will actually sit in the background and monitor your computer all the time, looking for any of these threats that we detect. If it finds anything getting created, it's going to get rid of it right then and there. Um, and the way that works is it's very unique to our particular engine. So it's very, very fast. It doesn't scan every single thing on your system. So you're not constantly monitoring every single file on your system at all times. There's not a whole lot of point in monitoring certain locations on your system because, they're just, a threat doesn't go there, So, a random file put in a particular location isn't a threat without some means of, keeping it persistent, some means of launching it. So we monitor for all that kind of stuff, and it's very effective, very efficient because we're not trying to look at every single thing.
Cool. So next question, after cleaning my Mac with Malwarebytes, does the Mac OS system need to be repaired?
No, it shouldn't need to be repaired. Now, if Malwarebytes for Mac it should remove all traces, everything that you would need to worry about. It might leave some cache files behind because those aren't a worry. But if there sometimes can be cases where something will have damaged your system somehow in a way that can't be reversed. It's hard to know whether that's the case or not, and it's not that common for that to happen. But if your Mac is for whatever reason not acting right afterwards, then yes, something may have damaged your system, or may have made some malicious change to your system or your settings that can't be reversed. And in that case, it might be a good idea to revert to a previous time machine backup or something along those lines.
Okay. Have you observed any cryptocurrency miners being installed on Macs?
Yes, we actually have. There was one that was just discovered recently. I believe it was called Ponet, or however you want to pronounce that. And it was a fake Counter-Strike global offensive. I think it was a crack for that game. And that was actually cross-platform. So there was a version of it for Windows, and there was a version that infected Macs as well.
Wow. And the script-based miners that we've been talking about on Malwarebytes Labs for a few weeks, I'm sure you've heard of the news, that run on websites. I mean, those are using a script, they're using the browser. It doesn't matter what operating system they're on. So you're likely going to encounter one on your Mac as well.
Exactly. Yeah. And unfortunately, there's not a whole lot that we can do about that right now. Even if we had web protection in the Mac product, it may, it can be difficult to block that sort of stuff. But if you do see it, fortunately, it's not really malicious. It's not doing anything to your computer other than maybe causing it to heat up and making everything slow down a little bit. So if you, are starting to hear your fans crank up on your Mac, it's starting to get hot, it's getting, the browser's getting slow, maybe just quit the browser and reopen it, and try not to go back to that last site you were at.
Okay. Is Onix safe to use with the Mac?
That's one of the few cleaners out there that I would say is safe, but I would still call into question whether it is necessary. In general, you really don't want to be cleaning your caches all the time. Your caches are there for a reason. They're there to keep your Mac running fast. If you're constantly messing with them, then your Mac is actually going to go slower. So where utilities like Onix can be useful is very rarely, I've actually never seen it happen in person, but very rarely caches can get corrupted. And if that happens, then deleting your cache files can be beneficial. And you can use a tool like Onix to do that. But the symptoms of cache corruption are fairly nebulous. There aren't any real specific symptoms of that, and it's so rare that that's not where I would look first for a problem.
Okay. Do you recommend businesses to give their employees Macs since it's perceived to be safer?
Well, yeah, they're definitely safer. I won't say that they're safe, obviously, because as we've just talked about, they're not. But just in terms of sheer volume of malware, the amounts of new malware we're seeing on the Mac every day are much, much, much smaller than what you see on Windows. So comparatively speaking, they are safer. Perhaps more importantly for businesses is actually IBM recently did a study where they showed that it's actually cheaper to buy the more expensive Mac and because it lasts a little longer, it has lower support costs, that sort of stuff. So that may be a more important reason to buy Macs.
Okay, cool. And then what are the top 3 mistakes you see Mac users making that basically makes them more vulnerable?
Yeah, so one big one is just not updating. So we see people literally every day on our support, on our forums, everywhere, who are still running very old, in some cases, versions of Mac OS. We frequently get questions from people saying, well, I still have Mac OS 10.6. Will your software work on that? Or do you have a version that works on that? And, the answer is no in that case. But more importantly, the question is, why are you still running a system that is so old and that has known vulnerabilities that, if I were a hacker and I were thinking, well, yeah, there aren't a lot of 10.6 users out there anymore, but it's definitely a significant number. Maybe I should try and infect these guys. I could actually, there are known vulnerabilities out there that you could use to install malware without ever having them have to do anything. They just go to a website and boom, they're infected. So.
Well, we're all out of time for questions, folks, but really thank you for submitting them. Hopefully you got a lot of information. We've talked about a lot of different stuff concerning the Mac threat landscape, and we hope you feel a little bit safer now. But I want to really thank Thomas Reed for joining us and telling us all about the Mac threat landscape and what we should be scared of. I appreciate that.
Yeah, no problem. It was fun.
Cool. Otherwise, you can go to Malwarebytes.com to check out any of our products, or especially if you want to try out the Malwarebytes for Mac product. And also, I would recommend checking out our blog, Malwarebytes Labs, at blog.malwarebytes.com for more information about Mac threats that are out there. But that's it for us. Thanks so much for joining and watching. Stay safe, safe surfing. I'll catch you next time.